Dinyalakan. Oke, thank you. Nah, kita bisa mulai sekarang ya, nggak apa-apa, dimulai aja nanti because we have two groups ya. Ini waktunya Mem kasih 15 sampai 20 menit ya untuk presentasi. Setelah itu mungkin kita langsung tanya jawab aja atau mau presentasi lagi satu kelompok lagi. Boleh kita presentasi dulu, nanti tinggal tanya jawab boleh. Atau pada saat kelompok ini lagi presentasi ya sekarang. Nah, kalau kamu punya komentar, punya pertanyaan, boleh tulis di chat box biar nggak lupa ya. Tulis di chat box, tinggal dibaca aja ya. Kalau ada pertanyaan untuk presenters, oke. Oke, you may start now. Boleh? Silahkan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. We are from Group 3rd. Today's topic is about assessing grammar and vocabulary. My member is Siti Ana Sartika. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And here's the table of content: assessing grammar, defining grammatical knowledge, assessing text, selective response, limited production, and extended production. And assessing vocabulary, the nature of vocabulary, defining lexical knowledge, and designing assessment text for repetitive vocabulary and productive vocabulary. Next slide, please. And the first material is assessing grammar, will be presented by myself about assessing grammar. Assessing grammar is in terms of assessment. Grammar is central to language describing and test taker performance. Today's the knowledge of grammar is evaluated by its correct use in communication through listening, speaking, reading, and writing in second language. Also, communicative competence has 4 competence: grammatical, social-linguistic, discourse, and strategic competence. Next slide, please. And in designing assessment text for selected responses, there is multiple choice text. The most common selected response text present a blank or underlined word and a sentence, and the test taker must choose the correct responses for the option that are given. And next is discrimination text, the text that asks the test taker to attend to input that can be either language or non-language, and to respond in the form of a choice between or among contrast or opposite, such as true or false. And the last is notizing text and consciousness raising text. Test takers are asked to indicate or underline or circle that they have identified a specific feature in the language sample. Next slide, please. And here's the example of the multiple choices. For the first grammatical form, Carson in Ethan, did you see the movie Star Wars, The Last Jedi last week? Yes, Mary. Yes, Mary loved it, and blah, blah, blah. And they gave multiple choices. I love to, I do, did I, so did I. And the first part of this example provide the context of the responses, but because all of the responses convey an intended meaning, An understanding of the context is not essential to identify the correct item. This item then is designed to assess only grammatical form, and therefore the item would be scored either right or wrong. And the second is with grammatical meaning with Yuko and Christina. Do you have a plan for the night? Not really. Thanks, but I have a final paper to write. And Christina asks, in this example, the first part asks the question about a future event. In the second part, the correct response could be any of the four options because they are grammatically correct. But the third part of the dialogue provides context and indicates the meaning of the correct response, which is refusal or a suggestion. The correct response of the four options is C. How about movie? Like the grammatical form example, the item is designed to assess only grammatical meaning and would be scored either right or wrong. And the last is grammatical form and meaning from Jeff and Sonia. Are you visiting your family this year? I don't know. And blah, blah, blah. It depends on the affairs. Here, both the grammatical form and meaning of the option need to be considered in order to identify the correct responses. As the second part of the dialogue indicates, there is a sense of uncertainty and added that this is the indication that the visit of a future event. The correct response is therefore limited to one that shows both this aspect, which is the case is C. Because both grammatical form and meaning are required, the item is scored either right or wrong again. Next slide, please. And next is design an assignment text limited production. There is a gap filling text. The taker must choose the appropriate responses for the deletion or gap based on text. And the next short answer text, the expected test taker responses can vary from single word to a sentence or two. And the last is dialogue completion text. The input is presented in the form or a short conversation or a dialogue. Next slide, please. Here is the example of gap. This both is example of gap filling text, where the test taker should fill the blank word in grammatical form. I blah 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 a book right before I go to sleep. Recently, I have been reading biographies. I blah 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 the biographies of Charlie Chaplin and Mahatma Gandhi. And for the past few nights, I blah 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 about Oprah Winfrey. In this example, the criteria of the correctness and the grammatical form, simple habitual present tense, read, past tense, read, and present perfect, have read, and past perfect continuous tense, have been reading. And the next example is the Mississippi River, also called the Great River, is the longest river in the United States. In this example, the criteria for correctness and both grammatical form and meaning in terms of simple habitual present tense, verb form, and lexical meaning of the word. So the first deleted word from the item is originates. Appropriate responses for the first deletion and addition to original could be either begins or starts, but not words such as originates. They are not meaningfully correct in the above context. Similarly, the next deleted words is charges, and other appropriate response are released or expelled, but not dismissed and denotates because although they have the same lexical meaning as the original word, in the context or the sentences, they are grammatical inappropriate. And the last is for short answer tags. They ask for the direction, read the following paragraph, then answer the question below in the sentence or two. Teachers and technicians. As teacher must apply the best of the two, or they trade to a threefold process of diagnosis, treatment, and assessment of learners in the classroom. And for the question is, what is mean by tools or day trade? What is one example of a treatment? What is another way of saying systematically evaluate an accomplishment to accurate objective? In some assessment texts, the input of present in the form of a question or question following the reading passage or oral visual stimulus. The expected test taker response can vary from a single word or sentences or two. The short answer can be scored dichotomously, right or wrong, for a single criterion or correctness, or with partial credit for multiple criteria for correctness. In this example, the taker must provide the responses that is both grammatical correct and meaningful in terms of question X. In this example, the responses must have understanding the phrase, such as tools of a trade and the treatment refer to classroom activities. In the next slide, please. And here's the example of dialogue completion text. In testing grammatical form and meaning, for direction is fill in the blank in each conversation with one or two more words that are grammatically correct in the context. Mayumi said, "How was your trip to Los Angeles?" "It blah blah blah," said Karina. "And I know you would enjoy your visit, so what did you do?" "I blah blah blah, Disneyland and Universal Studios." And the conversation too, it's example for server and customer. "What can I get you?" And blah blah blah. That's a good choice. The pastrami sandwich is one of our most popular items. I would also like a Coke. And blah 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 again. "Okay, then I'll have a lemonade." In both examples, the correct response requires that the test taker understand an information in the conversation that is provided by other participant. In the first of the two exchange, the past tense maker was in "How was your trip to Los Angeles?" indicate to the test taker that the event in the past, and therefore the responses must also be in the past tense. In addition, the test taker must understand that the responses must be positive because the next part of the dialogue indicate a pleasant trip. Likewise, in the second example, when the customer requests a certain beverage, the test taker must provide the responses of the server based on the next utterance of the customer. Next slide, please. And in designing assessment text, extended production is 5-point scale for assessing synthetic knowledge, 0 for none, 1 limited, 2 moderate, and 3 expensive, and 4 if it's complete. In formal group text is present the input in terms of incomplete information. Also role play or stimulation text, the input presented text test taker with a language or non-language prompt that asks them to take on a role or stimulate a situation to solve a problem, make decision, or what? Excuse me. Probably make decision or perform some transaction collaboratively. I think that's all for me. Next material will be presented by Siti Ana. Siti Ana, screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Resha. Then I'll explain about the next materials is assessing vocabulary. Okay, assessing vocabulary, and then the first we will talk about the nature of vocabulary. So we can identify words as tokens and types. The tokens means all the words in the paragraph, and then the types on the other hand do not count words that are repeated, only words that are different forms. And then the function words and content words are different. The function words is the prepositions, articles, conjunctions, and other little words are seen as belonging more to the grammar of the language than vocabulary. And then for the content words are nouns, verbs, adjective, and adverbs. And then some vocabulary tests have might focus larger on lexical items such as phrasal verbs like put up with and run into. And then for compound words like the personal computer or idioms pretty penny, and then which have meanings only as a whole unit. Okay, we move to the next material is about the types of lexical phrases. Here the four types of lexical phrases. The first one is polywords. The polywords are short fixed phrases that perform a variety of functions such as qualifying, marking fluency, and marking disagreements. And here the example of polywords, for the most part, so to speak, and wait a minute. And then we move to the next types is the institutionalized expressions, which mean that longer utterances that are fixed in the form, such as proverbs and formulas for social interactions. And then, for example, nice to meet you, how it's going, and etc. And then the third types of lexical phrases is phrasal constraints. Phrasal constraints are medium-length phrases that have basic structure with one or two slots that can be filled by various words or phrases. For example, yours truly or yours sincerely, and as far as I know, or as far as I can tell, and etc. And then the last types is sentence builders. Sentence builders are phrases that provide the framework for a complete sentence with one or two slots where whole ideas can be expressed. For example, on the other hand, not only, but also, and etc. Okay, we move to the next is defining lexical knowledge. Here are the three components made up by the couple definitions of vocabulary. The first is the context of vocabulary use. So vocabulary in context, traditionally in testing, we view context as the sentence or environment in which the target word occurs. The context of vocabulary use may vary across generations, formal and informal language, and varieties and dialect of language, as well as between non-specialized everyday vocabulary and specialized or technical vocabulary. So, to understand context in a more social framework, we should look at the type of the activity, and finally the channel, whether written or spoken communication in which the language will be used. And then the next is vocabulary knowledge and fundamental processes. So the fundamental process of vocabulary acquisitions is the another feature of vocabulary ability is the learner's knowledge of word characteristic, perceiving different form of words, recognizing linguistic routes to decipher meaning, and then using context to guess meaning, and even simply knowing the part of speech to which word belong. And then the last is metacognitive strategies for vocabulary use. Okay, for metacognitive strategies, the Chappell at 1994, the third component about the definition of vocabulary ability is metacognitive strategies that all language users use to manage communication. So the second language learners often use metacognitive strategies to overcome the lack of vocabulary knowledge when they are communicating. Okay. Here the some consideration in designing assessment tasks. So in design vocabulary test, we have 4 steps, and then the first steps is clarify your purpose, and then the second is define your construct, and then the third select your target word, and then the last step is determine mode of performance. Okay, here the following classic example of recognition. The first is vocabulary recognition, and then the second is vocabulary recall. Okay, we move to the next is designing assessment tasks for receptive vocabulary. The first is it is important to consider what role the context plays in the test items. And then the second is the learner must be able to recognize the word based on the given context. So read 2000 illustrate in the following items. The first is vocabulary in a one sentence context for high frequency word, and then the second vocabulary in a one sentence context for low frequency word, and then the third vocabulary matching exercise, and the last is word associations. Here the example of vocabulary in a one sentence context for high frequency word and low frequency word. Okay, for vocabulary in a one sentence context for high frequency word. In this example, the test takers must be able to show understanding of the underlying adjective in a sentence. The options are all attributes of a person and therefore knowledge of the meaning. of the word itself is needed to choose the correct response. And then for a low frequency word, although all the above response could be substituted for the underlying word, the information about the accidents being fatal in place, the more serious states of being dangerous. Okay, we move to the next example. Is the example of vocabulary matching exercise. Here the example. To assessing progress and giving feedback, teacher can also give vocabulary tests for proficiency purposes. In this case, the most common approach is to investigate a learner's vocabulary size. One frequently used test to assess a learner's vocabulary size is word associations. The procedure involves presenting the target word as a stimulus to test takers and asking them to say the first word that comes to mind. And then the last is the example of word association. The word, from this example, the word edit can collocate with words such as films or text. The meaning of edit is revised. Likewise, the word theme can be used as in a team of scientists or a sport team, but the meaning of team is founded in the work group. Okay, and then we move to designing assessment tasks for productive vocabulary. A common vocabulary test types is sentence completion, where the target vocabulary items is deleted from a sentence and the test takers must understand the context in which the words occur in order to produce the missing word. Okay, here the types of tasks for productivity vocabulary, which is the fill in the blank and selective deletion clause. Here the example of fill in the blank tasks for productive vocabulary. In the last items in these examples, the information provided in the sentence context help the test taker to understand that the water in the river has spread beyond its banks, which then means the flood. Okay, and then we move to the next example is the selective deletion clause. Okay, in the selection deletion clause of gap fill test, the test takers must be able to identify not only the meaning but also the form of the lexical items that is needed to fill in the blank. For example, in working with children who had been blah 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 away in mental blah blah blah, the first deletion indicates that the vocabulary items required for the blank is a verb and that the verb takes the past participle form. And then for the next deletions from this example is the word needs to be a noun and that noun needs to be plural. In addition to meaning and form, the pragmatic meaning of vocabulary items can also be assessed. Okay, I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that's the end of the presentation.
Oke.
Langsung buka Q&A atau enggak?
Boleh, kamu boleh gini aja biar lebih efektif ya. Boleh tulis di chat box ya. Nanti kita lanjutkan dengan presentasi yang kedua ya. Nah, jadi yang mau nanya tentang materi dari kelompok 3 tadi boleh tulis di ini aja di chat box-nya. Ya, jadi sambil mereka nanti menyiapkan jawaban, kelompok yang berikutnya presentasi aja dulu, begitu seterusnya. Nanti tinggal kita diskusikan, ya. Jadi biar lebih efektif. Jadi ditulis aja di chat box, ya. Kalau ada yang mau komentar atau pertanyaan terkait dengan materi yang tadi, ya. Nanti dibaca oleh yang presentasi, ya. Sambil kita dengerin teman-temannya yang presentasi berikutnya, biar lebih efektif, ya. Oke, silakan kelompok berikutnya siapa yang akan presentasi? Oke, which group will present the next topic?
Kelompok 4, Mem, Catherine dan Grace.
Catherine sama?
Grace Patricia.
Oke, Grace. Nah, ini Mem serahkan ke siapa hostnya yang akan share screen maksud Mem?
Masih Siti.
Oh ya, pada sekalian ya sama Siti Ana ya. Oke. Ya nggak apa-apa ya Siti Ana ya. Baik, ya nanti Siti Ana share. Nah, jadi silakan pada saat teman kamu presentasi, kamu boleh langsung komen di chat box. Ya, misalnya, oh aku kayaknya part ini saya mau nanya, misalnya langsung aja tulis ya di chat box. Nanti selesai dari sini baru kita diskusi. Teman-teman yang presentasi tadi tinggal membaca aja apa yang ditanyakan atau dikomentari oleh teman-teman yang lain di kolom chat box. Ya, oke. Nah, silakan Siti Ana boleh untuk share screen kelompok berikutnya ya. Ini tentang alternative assessment ya. Jadi ada hal baru yang bisa kita pelajari. Kalau sejauh ini kan kita hanya taunya traditional assessment ya. So we will talk about alternative assessment ya. Bagaimana alternative assessment itu? Oke, silakan. Oke, jadi ini kelompok 2 ini juga ya, kalau kalian nanti ada komentar, ada pertanyaan, tulis juga ya di kolom chat box. Silakan.
Mem, untuk kelompok ini moderatornya saya, Mem.
Oh, boleh, silakan.
Alright, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this presentation. So, I am Luxpiana Faradila Prapasel as a moderator for today's presentation. Let me introduce the group members. Next slide, please. All right, so those are the members of fourth group, that is Grace Patricia Hasibuan and Catherine Rohmoya Chapa. So today's presentation is about grading and student evaluation. So for the first material will be presented by Grace Patricia. For Grace, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lux. So the objective for our material are, the first is state a philosophy of grading tailored to your institution and context, and then communicate to students grading criteria that are both clear and an appropriate fit for your institutional context. The third is calculate grades based on a reliable system of scoring that is consistent with your institutional context and personal philosophy, and then develop scoring rubrics to assess student performance and provide feedback. And the last is resolve potential dilemmas that might otherwise cause a mismatch between a teacher's and students' understanding of the meaning of a grade. Next slide, please. Okay, this chapter addresses topics such as the first is what should grades reflect? How should different objectives, tasks, and components of a course figure into a formula for calculating grades? And then how do cultural and institutional philosophies dictate standards for grading? And how can a teacher achieve reliability in grading students? And the last is, what is a grading rubric? Next slide, please. The philosophy of grading, what should grade reflect? Grading questionnaire. Look at the items below and circle the letters for all items that should be considered or however greatly or minimally in a set of criteria for determining a final grade in a course. So when this questionnaire was administered to teachers at the American Language Institute or ALI at San Francisco State University, teacher must agree on item A. So item A is language performance of the student as formally demonstrated on tests, quizzes, and other explicitly scored procedures. B, your intuitive informal observation of the student's language performance. C, oral participation in class. D, improvement or over the entire course period. E, behavior in class, being cooperative, polite, disruptive, and etc. Of effort, and the motivation, and the last is punctuality and attendance. Next slide, please. The philosophy of grading, what should grade reflect? The first is when the questionnaire was administered to teachers at the American Language Institute at San Francisco, teachers must agree on item A. So these tasks and assignments represent observable performance and can be conveniently recorded in a teacher's record book. Items B and C also drew significant support, but a word of caution is in order here. If intuitive, informal observations by the teacher figure into the final grade, it is very important to inform the students in advance how those observations and impressions will be recorded throughout the semester. Likewise, if oral participation is listed as one of the objectives of a course and as a factor in a final grade, the challenge to all teachers is to quantify the participation as clearly and directly as possible. On items D through H, there was some disagreement and considerable discussion after the exercise, but all those items, at least a few votes for inclusion. This same assessment specialists specifically discourage the inclusion of improvement in final grades as it distorts the meaning of grades as indicators of achievement. I think that's all from me. Back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, for your great explanation. So everyone, before we move to the next presenter, I would like to tell you, you can freely type any question, comments, and suggestion related to the material of today's presentation in the chat box. So for the next material will be delivered by Catherine Rohmoya Chapa. For Catherine, time is yours.
Apakah suara saya kedengaran?
Iya, kedengaran.
Okay. First of all, I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't turn on my camera because my connection here unstable, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, Fiona, for the opportunity. Our material here is guideline for selecting grading criteria. There are 4 points that we have to consider the following guidelines. The first is consistency. It is essentially for all components of grading to be consistent with an institutional philosophy and regulation. Some institutions, for example, mandate deductions for unexcused absence. Others require that only the final exam determines a course grade. Still, other institutions may implicitly dictate a relatively high number of A's and B's for each class of students. The next is transparency. All of the components of a final grade need to be explicitly stated in writing to students at the beginning of a term of study with a designation of percentages or weighting figures for each component. And the next is specificity. If your grading system includes items D through G in the questionnaire that Grace have mentioned above, improvement, behavior, effort, and motivation, it is important for a teacher to recognize students' subjectivity, but this doesn't give teacher an excuse to avoid converting such factors into observable and measurable results. Teachers have to challenge themselves to create checklists, charts, and note-taking system that allow teacher to convey to the student the basics for conclusion. And the last is weighting. Finally, consider allocating relatively small weights to item C through H so that a grade primarily reflects achievement. A designation of 5% to 10% of a grade to such factors will not mask strong achievement in the course. On the other hand, a small percentage allocated to these fuzzy areas can make a significant difference in students' final course grade. Next slide, please. Okay, here is the calculating grades. There are absolute and relative grading. The first is absolute grading. So we can see 2 scenarios in our screen. The first scenario is a student in educational psychology that have experience. He or she got 90 to 95 points, but got a C range. The experience is like this. I will never forget university course I took in educational psychology for a teaching credential. There were regular weekly multiple choice quizzes, all of which were included in the final grade for the course. I studied hard for each test and consistently received percentage scores in the 90 to 95 range. I couldn't understand in the first few weeks of the course. First, why my scores warranted grades in the C range, thus the scores in the low to mid 90 should have rated at least a B. And the second question is why students who were in my opinion not especially gifted were getting better grades. So he or she got what might be we called as grade anxiety in this case from his or she her experience in this educational psychology. And we get different experience in second scenario. Like in another course, Introduction to Sociology, there was no test paper or graded exercise until a midterm essay style examination. The professor told the class nothing about the grading or scoring system, and we simply did the best we could. When the exam came back, I noted with horror that my score was a 47 out of 100. No grade accompanied this result, and I was convinced I had failed. After the professor handed back the test, amid the audible gasps of others like me, he announced, "Good news! No one received an F. He then wrote on the blackboard his grading system for this 100-point test. So we can see the big differences in these two scenarios. For more explanation, we can see on the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, this is the table of absolute grading scale. We can see, especially for the second scenario of introduction to sociology, that the student got 47. We can see in the midterm column. Yeah, he or she will get B. It's better than the person in first scenario that got 90 to 95 but got C. This is show us that in absolute grading scale, the grading activity is absolute for the students in many certain classes, that the teacher have their own absolute grading and the score to give to their student. Okay, next slide. Okay, here is relative grading. Relative grading is more commonly used than absolute grading. It has the advantage of allowing your own interpretation and of adjusting for unpredicted ease or difficulty of a test. Relative grading is usually accomplished by ranking students in order of performance or percentile ranks and assigning cutoff points for grades. So the point of this relative grading is the teacher's interpretation, and the teachers can make a prediction of their student performance in a class. Okay, next slide. Okay. Now, as we can see, all right, as we can see, teachers' perceptions and of appropriate grade distribution. Most teachers bring to a test or a course evaluation and interpretation of estimated appropriate distributions, follow that interpretation and make minor adjustment to compensate for such matter as unexpected difficulty. This prevailing attitude toward a relative grading system is well accepted and uncontroversial. What is surprising, however, is that teachers' preconceived notions of their own standards for grading often don't match their actual practice. Next slide. Here is the example for the student, the teacher perception. Yeah, there is a workshop with English teacher at the ALI or American Learning Institute at San Francisco State University. Teachers were asked to define a great bunch of students or a class that was exceptionally good, and to define another class of poor performers or a group of students who were quite unremarkable. For how the way the task was assigned, we can see on the next slide. This is the example of grading distribution questionnaire. The teacher in ALI class have 20 students in a class. You've done what you consider to be a competent job of teaching, and your class is what you would academically call a great bunch of students. What would be an estimated number of students in each final grade category? To reflect this overall impression of your students, indicate such a distribution in the column on the left, and do the same for what you would describe as poorly performing students in a class in which you've done equally competent teaching. Indicate the distribution of the poor performance in the column on the right. So we can see there are two columns that the teacher in this workshop can feel from their experience after they equally competent teaching in these two different classes. and got any result. For the result, we can see on the next slide. Okay. This is projected distribution of grades for a grade bunch and poor performance. We can see the percentages for these two classes. And there, yes, means like number of students. There are 20 students in the class, in each class. And we can see on the picture, we can conclude that in the grade bunch that have a pretty good performer students that have a better performer than poor performers of class, that student that more active, student more ambitious, they are mostly got A and they in their final grade as a result. Even only 0 by 1 the percentages that the student got F. Different with in the poor performance class that mostly student got C grades, and even A and F grades is the same the percentage. Okay, that's we conclude. Okay, I think for now that's all from me. Back to the moderator.
All right, thank you, Catherine, for your great explanation. So for the next presenter is Grace. So Grace, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lux. So I will explain about institutional expectations and constraints of consideration of philosophies of grading and procedures for calculating grades is not complete without a focus on the role of the institution in determining grades. The insights gained by the ALI teachers described previously, for example, were spurred to some extent by an examination of institutional expectations. Some institutions use neither a letter grade nor a numerical system of evaluation, and instead alternative evaluations of students. This preference for more individualist evaluation is often a reaction to the overgeneralization of letter and numerical grading. Being cognizant of an institutional philosophy of grading is an important step toward a consistent and fair evaluation of our students. If we are a new teacher in our institution, try to determine its grading philosophy. Sometimes it is not explicit. The assumption is simply made the teachers will grade students using a system that conforms to an unwritten philosophy. Next slide, please. Cultural norms and the question of difficulty. A number of variables bear on the issue in some cultures. The first is it is unheard to ask a student to self-assess performance. The teacher assigns a grade and no one questions the teacher's criteria. The measure of a good teacher is one who can design a test that is so difficult that no student can achieve a perfect score. The fact that students fall short of such marks of perfection is a demonstration of the teacher's superior knowledge. And then as a corollary, grades of A are reserved for a highly select few and students are delighted with BS. One single final examination is the accepted determinant of a student's entire course grade. And the last is the notion of a teacher preparing students to do their based on a test in an educational contradiction. Philosophies of grading, along with attendant cross-cultural variation, also must speak to the issue of gauging difficulty in tests and other graded measures. As noted above, in some cultures, a hard test is a good test, but in others, a good test results in a distribution such as the one in the bar graph for the grade bunch. Next slide, please. Here is some possible factors to gauge such difficulty in design a classroom test. The first is experience as a teacher or with appropriate intuition, and then adeptness at designing feasible tasks, taking special care to frame items that are clear and relevant, and the mirroring in class text that students have mastered, then varying text on the test itself, referencing prior tests in the same course, a true review and preparation for the test, knowing your students' collective abilities, and the last is a little bit of luck. Next slide, please. What do the letter grades mean? An institutional philosophy of grading, whether explicitly stated or implicit, presupposes expectations for grade distribution and for a meaning or description of each grade. We have already looked at several variations on the mathematics of grade distribution. What has yet to be discussed is the meaning of letter grades. Institutional manuals for teachers and students typically list the following descriptors of letter grades. A is excellent, B is good, C is adequate, D is unsatisfactory, F is failing or unacceptable. Notice that the C grade is described as adequate rather than average. The former term has in recent years been considered to be more descriptive, especially if a C is not mathematically calculated to be centered around the mean score. The letter grades ostensibly connote a holistic score that sums up a multitude of performance throughout a course or on a task, possibly consisting of multiple methods and traits. That's all from me. Back to moderator.
All right, thank you, Grace, for your nice explanation. So let's move to the next material that will be presented by Catherine. So for Catherine, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Fiona, for the opportunity. We can see on the screen. Previous slide, please. Okay. Scoring and grading tests and assignment. For the first is there is scoring methods that show to us there is dichotomous scoring, or means like the correct response receives 1 and the incorrect response receives a 0. For example, you can see on the screen in the multiple choice question below, the key or correct response is identified as response B, and the other response A, C, and D are the distractors or incorrect responses. More than 50 buildings in the down area, blah, 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 in the earthquake. Now, the students that answered B, of course, receives 1 score. And for those that answered the wrong answer will get 0 score or they get nothing. Okay, next slide. Okay. Polythermal scoring, more commonly known as partial credit scoring, and it is relevant when a limited response needs to account for several areas of language ability. A response can also have several levels of correctness ranging from 0 to 1 and 2. For example, it was starting to rain, so John walked down the street, blah, blah, blah. Now there are 4 responses: happy, quick, happily, and quickly. In grammar, happily and quickly is the right answer. So the student that answer happily and quickly will get the point 1. And in vocabulary, quick and quickly is the right answer. So the student that answer quick and quickly will get the point 2. And we can see on the total that there will be student got 2 points in this question, in this example. Okay, next slide. Scoring open-ended response. For open-ended performance-based learner responses, a scoring key is, of course, not appropriate. Use rating scales, or what are more commonly known as rubrics, to score these types of test tasks. Like a scoring key, a rubric is a guide that helps teachers assess student performance based on a range of criteria. A rubric or scale lists the criteria or characteristics a student response show at different levels or bands for those criteria. The criteria or descriptions of what is acceptable performance at different levels should be based on the language abilities or construct that the test is measuring. And for the okay, and for the developing a rubric template will be explained on the next presenter. That's all for me. Back to the moderator.
All right, Catherine, thank you for your explanation. So everyone, we already moved to the next material that will be presented by Grace. So Grace, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lux. Next slide, please. Developing a rubric. So we can see to our screen. There is a rubric template. A rubric is structured like a matrix. Criteria of the construct or ability are listed along one side, and the different levels of that criteria are listed along the other side. Next slide, please. There are 4 stages. The first is defining the ability or construct measured. When developing a rubric, we must first define the ability or construct that the task is measuring. The components of the ability are the criteria that each response must contain. At this stage, it is also important to decide whether we will use our rubric to score a response holistically or analytically, because the criteria must be combined for the former and separate for the latter for each level in the rubric. Holistic rubrics are useful when, for administrative purposes, it is impractical to break down student performance into separate categories, each with its own separate score. Instead, a holistic or overall evaluation suffices to accomplish the purpose of an assessment. Analytic rubrics, on the other hand, offer more information to the teacher and student in terms of several subcategories of performance. And then determining levels. The next part of the process is to decide on the levels or bands in which to place a learner's response. How many levels to include in a rubric also depends on the purpose of the rubric and what the score conveys. Just two rating levels can be used to show the presence or absence of a criterion or whether a standard was met. 4 or 5 rating levels can be used to provide more details. For example, beginning, developing, competent, and accomplished. Although more rating levels can provide greater detail, more than 5 levels become difficult to use, particularly differentiating descriptions among so many levels. The third is writing descriptors for each level. Writing the descriptors for each level is the final part of process. Successful descriptors should describe observable and measurable behavior. Descriptors should be kept as brief as possible and should include sufficient details to describe what a learner can do and not what they cannot do. Descriptors should also contain parallel language at each level. Only the degree to which the criterion is met should vary. And then there are guidelines for rubric development. So there are 7 steps. The first step is define the construct or ability to be measured by the task. And second step is identify specific observable attributes that you want to see your students demonstrate in their product, process, or performance. Third step is describe the scale or level of performance. Fourth step is for holistic rubrics, write through narrative descriptions incorporating each criterion into the description. For B steps is for analytic rubrics, write through narrative descriptions for each individual criterion. 5A step is for holistic rubrics. Complete the rubric by describing other levels on the continuum that range for excellent to poor work for the collective attributes. 5B step is for analytic rubrics. Complete the rubric by describing other levels on the continuum, ranging from excellent to poor work for each attribute. 6th step is collect samples of student work that exemplify each level. And the last step is revise the rubric as necessary. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
All right, everyone, I think that is all about the material of grading and student evaluation. Thank you for all of the presenters. So if I'm not mistaken, in the chat box that already we have already 3 questions, right? Jadi Mem, ini diserahkan ke kelompok sebelumnya atau gimana nih Mem?
Iya, jadi di sini kan ada beberapa pertanyaan yang ditujukan untuk ke kelompok 3 dan juga ada yang ditujukan ke kelompok 4 ya, sesuai dengan topiknya. Jadi ini bisa dijawab ya sesuai dengan presentasi dari kelompok tadi yang menyampaikan. Tapi tidak menutup kemungkinan juga di luar presenter ya, audiensnya bisa mengomentari ya, membantu memberikan komentar juga bisa. Tapi kita serahkan dulu ke kelompok yang mempresentasikan sesuai dengan topiknya ya. Oke, silakan mungkin kelompoknya Teresa kalau sudah siap boleh silakan dijawab dulu ya pertanyaan untuk topiknya yang sudah disampaikan. Ada beberapa pertanyaan di sini ya untuk kelompok Teresa.
Okay, in the chat box, there are 2 questions for group 3 from Nuskia Faradisa and Shakila Febriansyah. From Nuskia, why grammar is needed in the context of writing, but not in the context of speaking? And Shakila, why is the difficulty level of grammar question higher than reading and writing questions in general? What makes them so feared by test takers? The first question from Nuskia will be answered by Siti Ana. For Siti Ana, screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Resha. Here, I will answer the questions from this Nuskia Paradisa. The question is why grammar is needed in the context of writing, but not in the context of speaking. The first is why grammar is needed in the context of writing. Di sini alasannya tuh karena writing ini bentuknya lebih formal atau di dalam karena kan writing ya tulisan bisa dalam bentuk dokumen, bentuknya tuh lebih formal gitu. Kalau yang speaking kan lebih orally, itu tuh biasanya kalau speaking tuh yang penting lawan bicara kita itu mengerti maksud apa yang mau kita omongin gitu. Terus juga kalau dari speaking mereka tuh bisa lihat situasi sama kondisinya gitu. Tapi kan kalau writing ini karena dia lebih formal itu kita tuh harus benar-benar teliti dalam pemilihan katanya, terus juga sentence-nya itu gimana gitu. Jadi ini mengapa grammar tuh lebih diperlukan dalam writing daripada di speaking. Gimana bisa?
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna and Lisa, for question and responses. The next question from Shakila will be answered by myself. Why is the difficulty level of grammar question higher than reading and writing question in general? And what makes them so feared by test taker? First, grammar rules are definitely tricky. One of the biggest reasons that are learning and using grammar correctly it's so difficult is that there are so many exceptions to every rule. It takes time to learn all these exceptions, and unless you use English enough, it will be almost impossible to be able to learn and master all these different exceptions. And what makes them so feared by test taker is, I think, test taker is lack of learning concepts such as books on participant ways of learning, motivating teachers, and lack of mastery of the material, nervous, shaking, sweating while doing study result tests, and fear of punishment and anxiety of shame, desperate or not confident in doing the test of learning outcomes, and restless, anxious, and daydreaming. I think that's all. Shakila, what do you think?
Okay, thank you, Reisha, for your answer.
Well ya, untuk sebelum ke jawaban tanggapan respon dari kelompok yang lain ya, Mem akan menambahkan sedikit mengenai pertanyaan tadi yang sudah disampaikan oleh Nuskia sama Sakila ya. Actually they are related ya. Sebetulnya kedua pertanyaan ini hampir berkaitan ya, hampir sama saling berkaitan. Nah, di sini menanyakan konteks grammar ya. Nah, grammar ini kan kalau kalian lihat ya, yang sering muncul itu untuk yang benar-benar dikhususkan dalam konteks grammar aja yang dites ya, itu di standardized testing. Misalnya tes TOEFL ya, tes TOEFL atau IELTS. Nah, itu benar-benar kemampuan grammar itu diukur. Mungkin di sini ada nggak yang sudah ikut tes TOEFL? Nantinya di kelas ini. Yang pernah ikut nggak tes TOEFL? Tes TOEFL yang di Unja aja misalnya. Yang apa sih namanya Juel. Ada yang pernah ikut nggak? Nah, nanti kamu akan ikut ya, karena itu kan jadi syarat untuk bisa skripsi ya, untuk lulus ya, itu nanti kan. Nah, di situ ada 3 bagian. Ini contoh dari Mem tentang standardized testing ya, salah satu tes untuk mengukur profesiensi kita, kemampuan bahasa kita ya. Nah, di situ ada listening, ada structure, sama reading comprehension, 3 macam skill. Kalau dijual itu ya, atau TOEFL yang umum itu nggak ada writing ya. Tapi kalau dia TOEFL IBT ataupun IELTS ya, tes IELTS itu ada writing sama speaking. Kalau TOEFL yang biasa ya, paper base atau yang jual yang di Unja itu ya, dia cuman mengukur listening, structure sama reading. Nah, di sini grammar dites ya, ada di situ tesnya secara khusus. Jadi benar-benar dilihat kemampuan grammarnya ya. Nah, bagaimana menganalisis kalimat yang benar dalam bahasa Inggris ya, kemudian melengkapi ya, di sana kan bentuknya multiple choice. Kalau di soal TOEFL itu multiple choice. Nah, di sini pertanyaan dari Nuskia tadi, kenapa sih sepertinya yang terlihat itu kan grammar itu lebih dibutuhkan untuk writing ya, tetapi tidak di dalam konteks speaking. Sebetulnya bukan berarti di speaking itu kita tidak butuh grammar sama sekali, no ya, bukan ya, tetap kita butuhkan grammar. Karena kalau nggak ada grammar, we cannot make sentence ya, kita nggak bisa bikin kalimat ya. Nah, tapi di sini maksudnya yang sudah dijelaskan Siti Ana tadi, bahwa mungkin speaking itu kalaupun kita grammarnya nggak pas banget, selagi orang bisa menangkap makna yang kita sampaikan, ya pembicaraan yang kita sampaikan cukup, ya meaningnya dapat. Nah, tapi kalau dalam writing, kalau grammarnya itu nggak pas, kalimatnya itu berbeda, yang harusnya misalnya kita ngejelasinnya pakai past tense misalnya ya, pakai tenses past tense, karena kita menceritakan masa lalu, pengalaman masa lalu ya, tapi yang kita tulis di situ present. Nah, jadi pada saat orang membacanya, orang ini mengartikan itu bahwa terjadi saat ini, padahal yang kita maksud adalah cerita di masa lalu. Jadi tidak akurat. Nah, di dalam hal ini ya, grammar itu untuk melihat accuracy, keakuratan. Sementara kalau misalnya kita lancar ya, kita fluent ya, misalnya ngomong ya, kita lancar banget, fasih ya, itu fokusnya ke fluency, kelancaran. Kalau orang speaking ya, kalau dia ngomong ya, lancar, fluent banget ya, itu fluency titik tekannya. Tapi it doesn't mean ya, grammar itu tidak kita butuhkan untuk skill yang lain. Ya, seperti membilang tadi, grammar, vocab, ya, spelling, pronunciation itu saling ya, dia melengkapi, dia membantu untuk keterampilan kita dalam berbahasa, baik itu listening, speaking, reading, writing. Ya kalau nggak ada vocab, nggak ada grammar, orang nggak bisa nulis. Nggak ada vocab ataupun nggak ada grammar juga mungkin untuk speaking juga susah ya, nggak bisa menyusun kalimat gitu. Walaupun memang ya titik tekannya kalau speaking kan selagi meaningful ya, orang bisa menangkap itu walaupun grammarnya agak meleset ya. Nah, itu masih bisa dimaklumi. Tapi untuk writing, apalagi secara akademik itu harus pas, ya, supaya orang bisa paham apa yang disampaikan. Kalau enggak, nanti bisa salah makna, gitu ya. Nah, kemudian di sini dari Sakila ya, why is the difficulty level of grammar questions higher than reading and writing? Tadi juga sudah dijelaskan oleh Reisa, karena memang ada hal-hal yang mesti akurat dinilai untuk reading dan writing. Karena itu bentuknya tertulis kan, tertulis. Nah, jadi kalau maknanya nggak nyampe, bingung ya. Nah, kemudian makanya kalau writing itu kan misalnya kita salah karena nanti akan berbeda makna gitu. Akurat, mesti akurat, accuracy ya. Nah, tapi dengan kita nantinya akurat, nah ya, insya Allah nanti fluensinya juga bagus. Ya, kedua hal itu tidak bisa dipisahkan. Ya, nanti otomatis kalau kita juga dalam speaking, kalau misalnya grammar kita sudah bagus, nanti otomatis ya pada saat kita ngomong itu akan spontan. Ya, kita bisa tahu oh saya kayaknya pakai past tense kan dengan sendirinya otomatis. Ya, kalau kita juga sudah punya ilmunya gitu untuk grammar ya, accuracy and fluency sama-sama penting ya. Oke, kemudian mungkin bisa diteruskan untuk pertanyaan dari kelompok yang berikutnya ya. Untuk kelompok berikutnya nih dari Luxiona ya, sama dari Aditya. Oke, silakan mungkin kelompok 4 bisa menanggapi. Yang nanya Luxiona sama Adit ya. Atau mungkin dari pertanyaan dari Sakila sama Nuskila tadi ada yang ingin menambahkan, boleh ya. You have additional information. Nah, nanti kalau kalian ikut tes IELTS ya, kemampuan speaking-nya dites juga, kemampuan writing juga, jadi dia per skill. Jadi speaking-nya itu malah mereka bukan cuma melihat fluensi aja, kalau terlalu banyak salah grammarnya juga akan mempengaruhi scoring. Yang harusnya misalnya kurang to be, misalnya ya, nggak ada to be-nya, atau misalnya benar-benar salah banget gitu ya. Nah, itu juga akan mengurangi nilai kalau dalam tes ya, dalam sebuah tes. Kalau kita ngomong sehari-hari kan, as long as you can understand the speakers, ya itu nggak masalah. Tapi kalau dalam tes, ya, selain kita lancar ngomongnya, ya akurasi itu penting, keakuratan, ya termasuk grammarnya, ya nggak boleh salah semua, nggak bisa kalau untuk sebuah tes, ya. Oke, silakan ini untuk kelompoknya 4 ya, boleh kalau sudah bisa ingin memberikan tanggapan atau respon, boleh silakan.
Alright, ma'am. Apakah suara saya kedengaran nih?
Iya, kedengaran. Silakan ditanggapi.
Okay, okay, for the first is the question from Fiona. We are already explained that relative grading is commonly used than absolute grading. The question is, can you provide an example of relative grading and which one that most appropriate between absolute and relative grading, and also the grading that can measure the student's ability more better that can use for beginner teachers? Oke, jadi di sini Luxiona bertanya tentang contoh dari relative grading itu seperti apa. Dari yang sudah kami jelaskan, bahwa relative grading itu allowing the teacher's own interpretation and of adjusting for unpredicted ease or difficulty of the test. Jadi guru di sini punya penilaian, punya sistem penilaiannya sendiri. They have their own grading system. Jadi guru di sini bukan cuma punya skor penilaian yang mutlak seperti di absolut, tapi guru di sini bahkan dia bisa menilai berdasarkan student behavior, berdasarkan keaktifan siswa, berdasarkan kesehariannya. Jadi bahkan di sini teacher memberlakukan assigning cut-off points for grades. Mungkin ini berkaitan dengan tingkah laku siswa lagi. Kalau misalkan siswa tersebut kurang disiplin atau apa, itu bahkan dapat mempengaruhi nilai mereka di relative grading ini. Gitu loh, Fiona. Dan pertanyaan kedua tentang mana yang lebih mana yang lebih appropriate antara absolute atau relative grading, especially for beginner teachers, untuk guru yang baru memulai proses mengajarnya. Nah, menurut kami ini tergantung gurunya lagi, gimana akan lebih baik kalau misalkan guru ini yang pada tahap ini bisa collaborate the two of the grading. Tapi khusus untuk ini mungkin the beginner teacher can lebih condong ke absolute mungkin, karena seperti yang kita lihat, beginner teacher kan belum terlalu mengenal siswanya untuk menggunakan relative grading, di mana di relative grading tadi guru menilai dari begitu banyak aspek di luar tes, di luar midterm, di luar quiz yang mungkin dilakukan di kelas. Nah, jadi as beginner teachers mungkin mereka lebih terbantu kalau menggunakan absolute grading. Gitu loh, Fiona. Oke, back to the moderator.
Oke, before saya menanggapi jawaban Catherine, mungkin teman-teman ada yang ingin memberikan komen atau suggestion related to my question? Oke, kayaknya nggak ada ya. Jadi kalau berdasarkan tadi penjelasan Catherine, kalau untuk beginner teacher itu sepertinya more appropriate-nya menggunakan absolute grading ya. Kan berarti apakah tidak memungkinkan untuk beginner teacher mengaplikasikan relative grading waktu mereka baru memulai pengajaran? Walaupun mereka baru mengetahui studentnya itu tadi, apakah nggak memungkinkan gitu? Kat.
Oh, okay. The question is it possible to the beginner teacher use relative grading, right? Nah, bukannya tidak mungkin, mereka bisa saja menggunakannya, karena guru di beginning experience pasti punya first impression sama student tersebut. Jadi guru mungkin menilai dari performa pertama student, mungkin mereka bisa tangkap dari beberapa aspek. Oh, student ini bagus di sini, student ini kurang dari tingkah lakunya di dalam hal ini kurang, mungkin untuk di skornya mereka bisa dapat sekian gitu. Jadi kesimpulannya, Fiona, mungkin bukannya tidak mungkin, cuman untuk lebih appropriate tadi, mereka harusnya absolute grading yang lebih mutlak untuk menilai siswa tersebut. Gitu loh, Fiona. Back to the moderator.
Alright, thank you, Catherine, for your response. I think it is enough for me. So let's move to the next question, ma'am.
Yeah.
All right, maybe so the presenters, which question that you want to answer from Indah or Adit?
A question from Indah will be answered by Grace Patricia.
All right, Grace, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lux. So the question is, do you presenters have your own grading system when teaching? Whether apart from the theory you have explained, ya kami pasti memiliki penilaian tersendiri. Seperti yang dikatakan Kat tadi, kami tidak hanya fokus kepada penilaian utama atau penilaian mutlak, karena setiap guru itu pasti mempunyai dan diperbolehkan untuk memberi nilai kepada siswanya dari berbagai aspek. Mungkin jika kami nanti menjadi seorang guru, kami bisa menilai siswa kami dari keaktifannya selama di kelas, selama mereka mengikuti pembelajaran di kelas juga, dan mungkin juga kami bisa menilai mereka dari kedisiplinan serta rasa tanggung jawab mereka yang mereka tunjukkan selama atau dalam mengerjakan tugas yang para guru berikan. Mungkin itu saja. Apakah Indah bisa menerima jawabannya?
Okay, thank you for your answer, Grace. I think that's enough.
Okay. Back to the moderator.
All right, thank you, Grace, for your answer, and thank you, Indah, for your response. If you guys have any comments or suggestion related to Indah's question, feel free to tell us about your opinion. All right, I think there is no response. So yeah, let's move to the last question that from Adit. How presenters, you want to answer right now or what?
Okay, we will try. The added question is, grading in Indonesia and USA are very different. It has proving us that we are more competitive than in the USA students. Like for example, in Indonesia, when we got 70 is still great as B, but in USA, 70 already get an A, I mean at least. So what do you think about this grading system in Indonesia? Why is different? So Adit, we have we have explained about this before in our presentation, like in affiliate grading, even in different course, like in different course, they have different grading, like and this course got 90, but in C range, but in this and other course, they can got B even when their score is 47. Like this, maybe we can conclude that antara Indonesia dan USA punya sistemnya yang their own system. Mereka punya kurikulum masing-masing. Mereka punya target yang membuat grading system ini di Indonesia lebih kompetitif seperti yang Adit sampaikan tadi. Nah, mungkin perbedaannya terletak pada kurikulum dan sistem ini. Mungkin dari audience can help us. Back to the moderator.
All right, thank you, Catherine. So Catherine's answer is faktor pembeda kenapa penilaian yang di Indonesia sama USA itu berbeda dikarenakan sistem pendidikan sama kurikulumnya. So everyone, if you have more comments or opinions, suggestion related to Adit's question, feel free to tell us about your opinion, everyone. Or Adit, did Kath respond already answer your question? Or you have any comments of it?
I think it's quite bisa dipenuhi lah dengan apa yang dibicarakan oleh Kat tadi, yang memang termasuk kurikulum jangan di sini kan di saat dengan sana kan memang berbeda sama sistem pendidikannya juga. Tapi kenapa kadang kan kita tahu Asia kan memang orangnya bisa dibilang kayak gitu. Tapi gimana ya, SDA kita tuh kurang gitu ya, sebenarnya manusia gitu. Nah, lebih kalau dibilang berkemampuan punya skill itu banyak dari Amerika, padahal kan di sekolah mereka bisa dibilang kayak asal-asalan kan. Kita kadang lihat film itu yang seperti itu kan pada kenyataannya ya, juga anak lulus kelas, padahal di Indonesia punya rules yang sangat ketat. Jadi itu maksudnya kenapa sih bisa bisa efektif di sana gitu? Kenapa di Indo yang bilangnya kompetitif dalam hal pelajaran, tapi dalam hal itu mereka kurang.
Adit, I'm very sorry, your voice isn't clearly.
Iya ya, jadi tadi suaranya Adik nggak jelas ya, nggak kita bisa tangkap. Nah baik, Mem akan menanggapi ya dari pertanyaan tadi ya yang kaitan dengan kelompok 4. Ini you talk about beginner teachers, artinya novice ya, novice teacher, jadi guru yang baru ya, baru terjun di lapangan, yang masih masa kerjanya masih baru gitu ya. Nah, sebetulnya ini balik lagi, seperti kita ketahui kan kalau guru itu kan dia harus ada 4 kompetensi yang dimiliki seorang guru ya, sesuai dengan undang-undang. Ada kompetensi profesional, kompetensi sosial ya, kompetensi personal, ada 4 ya. Nah, termasuklah salah satunya adalah kompetensi pedagogik ini, termasuk bagaimana menilai, melakukan assessment. Ya, itu adalah salah satu kompetensi yang harus dimiliki seorang guru. Ya. Nah, balik ke kaitannya dengan pertanyaan tadi ya. Jadi yang penilaian yang seperti apa sih yang harusnya dilakukan oleh seorang guru? Padahal dia misalnya baru kerja ya, baru mulai tugas ya. Sebetulnya seorang guru itu layaknya harus bisa melakukan sebuah assessment ya, terlepas dari itu absolut maupun relatif ya. Nah, mungkin di awal ini kan dia butuh knowledge ya, butuh skill supaya bisa melakukan penilaian tadi ya. Kalau misalnya untuk yang relatif relatif grading ya, relatif itu artinya fleksibel. Jadi gurunya bisa fleksibel ya, melakukan penilaiannya fleksibel. Jadi bisa, tadi kan ada persentil ya, ada apa, ibaratnya tuh rata-rata ya. Jadi dia bisa membandingkan dengan siswa yang lain. Kalau dia absolut artinya penilaiannya itu udah fix ya, ada kriteria khusus. Kalau tidak mencapai angka sekian itu nggak lulus ya, siswanya nggak lulus. Jadi misalnya kalau di sekolah itu ada KKM ya, kriteria ketuntasan minimal misalnya kayak itu kalau dikaitkan ke sana. Kalau misalnya dia nggak mencapai nilai 70%, artinya dia belum tuntas atau belum bisa diluluskan. Jadi dia harus remedial kan, misalnya seperti itu. Nah, kaitan ke penilaian tadi, beginner teachers oke, karena mungkin dia masih baru, pengalamannya juga belum banyak ya. Jadi ya untuk di awal mungkin dia masih butuh training, jadi knowledge, skill, termasuk skill bagaimana melakukan sebuah penilaian assessment ya. Jadi di sini nggak lama, so intinya walaupun mungkin di awal ya berproses, seorang guru itu mesti memiliki kompetensi dalam mengajar, salah satunya melakukan penilaian. Ada 4 kompetensi guru yang harus dimiliki sesuai dengan undang-undang ya. Nanti bisa kamu cek. Jadi termasuklah kompetensi pedagogik ya, kompetensi profesional yang kaitannya dengan bidang pengajaran dan ada penilaian di situ. Ya. Mau nggak mau tetap harus melatih dirinya untuk membuat untuk bisa membuat penilaian kepada siswanya ya, baik itu relatif maupun absolut ya. Oke, kemudian nah kalau misalnya Mem nambahin, sebetulnya di samping traditional assessment ya, traditional assessment itu ini yang biasa dilakukan, misalnya tes ya, tes itu UTS ya, tengah semester, ujian akhir semester, itu tradisional ya, tradisional assessment. Nah, guru juga bisa melakukan alternative assessment. Alternative assessment ini biasanya dalam bentuk proses ya, bisa dalam bentuk portofolio ya, bisa dalam bentuk observation, bisa juga dengan what is it, ini apa namanya, interview bisa, ya itu alternative assessment di samping tes yang biasa dilakukan, ya. Jadi bisa guru juga mesti memiliki skills dan knowledge seperti itu, ya, dalam membuat sebuah penilaian kepada siswanya. Baik, kaitan dengan pertanyaan Adit ya, Adit ini kan mau melihat kenapa sih antara Indonesia sama Amerika itu ada perbedaan gitu ya. Nah, dalam sisi penilaian. Sebetulnya ya kalau kalian tahu ya, sebetulnya justru penilaian di luar itu yang nggak mudah. Bukan di kita yang mudah. Penilaian di luar itu sangat-sangat strict ya. Dan mereka tuh benar-benar kalau misalnya fail, benar-benar fail dalam mata kuliah gitu. Dan beban kuliahnya pun berat gitu. Jadi mereka itu ada silabusnya ya. Dalam tiap minggu itu ada tugas ya, dan tugasnya itu selain tugas membaca, mereka juga harus mereview. Kadang bukan cuma mereview chapter ya, ada mereview buku, kemudian membuat summary dan sebagainya, ya, kemudian membuat laporan gitu ya, dan juga tuntutan dari kriteria untuk kelulusannya juga tinggi gitu. Misalnya untuk bisa lulus dari mata kuliah itu minimal berapa persen ya tercapai. Kalau tidak tercapai mereka nggak lulus ya, nggak lulus dan harus mengulang kembali. Sebetulnya ya, tapi balik lagi itu cultural background ya, budaya juga. Kalau di kita tuh lebih banyak nanti mungkin maklum, misalnya tugasnya telat ngumpul gitu kan, masih dikasih extend waktu. Kalau di sana enggak. Kalau telat ngumpul tugas, 0 atau pengurangan nilai. Ya, dikurangi nilainya kalau telat ngumpul tugas. Misalnya harusnya deadline-nya tanggal 20, tapi belum ngumpul juga. Nah, biasanya ada pengurangan nilai atau bahkan itu tidak diterima sama sekali tugasnya yang dikumpulkan. Itu balik lagi, budaya juga mempengaruhi, and then sistem ya, rules-nya, aturan aturan yang dibuat di sana, kebijakan ya terkait dengan kurikulum. Jadi ya tidak bisa dikatakan bahwa di sana lebih mudah juga enggak ya. Di kita juga mungkin ada penilaian kita juga ketat juga gitu. Nah, ketat dalam artian ada dosen ya atau pengajar yang kalau kamu telat tugas itu tidak diterima sama sekali. Ada 0 nilainya. Ya ada. Seperti itu. Jadi balik lagi kan itu balik lagi ke budaya juga, kurikulum juga, sistem juga gitu. Jadi don't think that justru di luar lebih ini lagi, lebih fix lagi, lebih strict lagi, nggak bisa main-main, ya beban kerjanya, beban tugasnya lebih banyak lagi kalau di luar, ya. Baik, so far masih ada komentar atau tanggapan ya sebelum kita akhiri ya, ini sudah hampir 12:30 ya. Untuk hari ini. Oke, untuk pertemuan hari ini kan tadi di-record, nanti hasil record-nya kirim ke MEM. Ya, boleh ke email aja kalau nggak susah ya, berat ya, boleh ke email aja. Nah, and then hari ini saya hitung dua meeting aja, karena ada 2 yang presentasi ya, saya hitung 2 meeting. Nah, minggu depan siapa yang akan presentasi? Kelompok mana maksud MEM? Presentasi.
Kelompok 5, Mem.
Putri ya, Putri Melisa. Oke. Putri Melisa itu topiknya tentang apa? What is the topic of your presentation? Topiknya tentang apa? Minggu depan. Ya, jadi nanti minggu depan ya kita lanjutkan presentasinya. Sampai di sini ada yang mau ditanyakan nggak? Any comment? Nah, kalau tidak ada, kita cukupkan dulu sampai di sini ya. Sudah 1:30 ya. Nah, jadi silakan nanti dibaca lagi ya. Kemudian kamu juga bisa melihat contoh-contoh ya. Bisa juga dari YouTube, itu banyak ya, banyak sekali yang kaitan dengan scoring, kaitan dengan assessment itu banyak ya yang bisa kita baca-baca. Baik, ya untuk semuanya ya hari ini Ibu cukupkan dulu ya. Kita ketemu lagi soal minggu depan. That's all. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.